I'll bet you I've probably picked up 10, 15 of these. Every time I disc this place, there's more of them. Never ends. All right, so I've come out here to this little 5-acre patch of woods that we own. It's 200 foot wide from pole to pole, and this is just, it ends up growing up as basically a garbage collection for people throwing trash and needles off the side of the road and bottles. And when I mow it, they all get smashed up. It seems like people throw a little bit less garbage when there's a crop here, and I just like it better. The ground's getting better from the growth. So my own little experiment, I started with annual ryegrass from the pole going this way, and as I ran out, I feathered it back thinner right here in the middle. And then at that end, it's winter wheat, and I didn't quite make it to that telephone pole, which is lower down, and it's the best soil that there is here. It's the darkest, the thickest, the loosest, you know, really fertile. So I filled that patch with crimson clover, exclusively crimson clover, because I have a theory that how big crimson clover grows is not about how good the soil it's in. My theory from observation is that it's how much it's paired with a broadleaf. So if you've got a dense broadleaf that's demanding high nitrogen, I believe that, and some scientists say, this is where I got the idea, I didn't dream it up on my own, but there is, I guess, research evidence suggests that through the rhizosphere, and probably through bacterial or fungal associations, these plants are able to communicate, and that the wheat or the rye, which both want nitrogen, particularly the wheat, they are able to say, hey, clover, could you fix me some atmospheric nitrogen? And the clover is able to say, yeah, sure, I've got extra, but you know what, I can always grab more. I've got enough for me, and I'll grab some out of the air for you too. And it seems to me that legumes, particularly clovers, grow best when they look like they're competing for sky and growing upward with a broadleaf. But I think that there's a symbiotic relationship, because the broadleaf usually grows bigger when it's with the legume as well. So if it was a case of limited resources and competition, pairing them together in a high density, you'd get less. You'd get a shorter crop from each. When I pair them together in a high density, I get a taller, faster, thicker, lusher crop from both, which to me says that there is a symbiotic relationship that's mutually beneficial and basically supercharges through that relationship both plants. And also I'm gonna get to check and see in here which does better. At this gradient, I'm gonna get to see, is it pure wheat does better, or pure rye does better, or wheat and rye together do better. And then I've also thrown in some dense clusters at each of the 3 gradients. I've thrown in some dense clusters of the clover, crimson clover. So we're also going to get to evaluate to some degree, do they do better with or without clover? And it's not a perfect experiment, because the way the sun comes across this place, the front row, nearest to the road, the front row always does better. I prepared this soil, which previously this was a forage sorghum crop, 3 to 6 feet tall, and I mowed it and just ran it into the ground. I did not cut it off. I mowed it and I mulched it and I left it here as a nutrient, and then I disked and disked and disked. I disked it up quite a lot so that the clods, because these small seeds, clover's not very powerful. It's not going to come up through a clod of dirt. You really kind of have to have pretty fine dirt or a really shallow seed. If you've got a really shallow seed, it's not protected. The sun can dry it out. It can sprout on the surface and not put in a taproot. What mostly happens is the chickens, road chickens, wild chickens, actually there's a cluster of them down there. What happens is the chickens will come and eat all the seed. There'll be 100 chickens here if I don't get this covered up. But if I cover it with a disc, if I run a disc again on top, it'll get put in too deep and I'll get real slow emergence. So what I'm going to do, hopefully you can hear me over that machine. I got a bad charging system, so I don't shut it off. I charge it with a solar charger at home, so I'm too lazy to change out the stator, because it's kind of a big job. This roller is crazy heavy, 1/2-inch wall thickness. See how thick that is. Really heavy, filled with water. I can't even hardly move it. It's extremely heavy. And that drag chain is going to get dropped down. So the drag chain is going to scatter, lightly cover the seed, and then the roller is going to pack it all, which is going to help protect the bulk of it from the chickens. So I'll get after it, and when it starts coming up, I'll give you an update. Well, here's my final walk cleaning up the rubbish. The downside to a roller is that it can't contour to the ground. So anywhere that the disc, let's say one coulter dug in deeper right here, you're going to get a little furrow that the drum just cannot pack into. So I do a lot of driving around, mostly steering the front tires into these little tracks, just kind of zigzagging around, hoping that the tires pack the last bit of the seed in. You're not going to get it all. A cultipacker would be the ideal, or I suppose you could run a land plane over it to get a really smooth surface before you seeded, or maybe a rototiller. But I'm not into rototilling, honestly. I think it's a little too much tillage. I know that this is quite a bit, and I don't love it. It's kind of an evil that I tolerate. Ideally, eventually I'll have a no-till drill that I'm probably going to build a no-till drill, maybe 4 foot wide, to go behind a little lawnmower or a quad, because I have access to lots of really small chunks of land for free, but no big open fields or anything like that. We're in the mountains with forests. You don't get much flat land. Farm quality land is at a premium. There's one of them chickens seeing if you can come eat my seed right now. There'll be 50 of them before dark. But yeah, anyhow, it works. I do have the parts to build a cultipacker, probably a 6 footer, 6 or 7 foot, to go behind my Kubota, which would speed this up a lot. The downside is the wider you go, the poorer it handles these contours, because there is actually a bank for the road. So a 7 foot cultipacker, it's not going to float quite enough. The rings on a cultipacker float up and down on the drum, so you do get some contourability, but you're not going to get a real arch, and you're not going to get it on a drum either. The narrower the tool, the better it can work on these contours. But the reality is, I just can't, I can't get all of that. I can't get every inch of it perfect, and nor do I have to. Who cares? It's just to feed animals. And this year I didn't even feed it to them. This year's summer crop was just to get the soil improved, and it did. It took on a lot of more depth, more softness. Definitely an improvement in the topsoil quality. There's a little bit of chaff on the top for an organic matter to plant into, not nearly as much as I like. Ideally, I could have a mat laid down on top of this. In a perfect world, I'd have a roller crimper on the front and a no-till drill on the back following behind it. So in one pass, you could lay down a crop and have cutter knives that just barely cut a furrow enough to put a seed, press it in with a presser wheel, close it, like on you go,